Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about Allison Botha. I don't know if you guys have heard her or not, but it is the craziest story you've ever heard, but so inspiring at the same time. So I really hope you'll stick around for it. Wonderful story about hope and survival. Just major trigger warnings on this one, okay? So we're talking rape, assault, attempted murder. I mean, just really, really bad things. So I wanted to put that out there first. Nevertheless, I hope you'll stick around. But if you think it's going to be too much for you, just click off now and come back for something else. Allison Botha was born on September 22nd, 1962 in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, to parents Brian and Claire. Allison had one sibling, an older brother named Neil. Her parents divorced when she was 10, and Allison and her brother were raised by their mom. Allison was a head girl at the Collegiate High School for Girls in Port Elizabeth. Head girls and boys are responsible for representing the school at events. They must serve as good role models for students and share the pupils' ideas with the school's leadership. At just 27, Allison worked as an insurance broker and lived in a quiet complex in the city of Port Elizabeth. Allison spent Saturday, December 17th, 1994, with her friend Kim and Kim's two sons at the beach. After the beach, two mutual friends of Kim and Allison's showed up at Kim's flat. So the four friends decided to drive over to Allison's flat. I'm assuming because Kim had her children there at the flat with her for some pizza, wine, and to hang out. Allison had promised to drive her friend back home at the end of the night. After dropping Kim off, Allison drove home in the early morning hours of Sunday, December 17th, 1994. When she turned onto Deer Street, she realized that her very convenient spot outside her home had been taken. Parking was apparently always a problem, so she drove her yellow Renault 5 around until she found a spot under a huge tree about 32 feet from her flat. She reached over to grab a bag of clean laundry when she felt a gust of warm air and saw a man standing at her door with a knife in his hand. He was scrawny with light blonde hair, wearing a t-shirt and track pants. This man was Franz Dutoit. In a very soft voice, almost a whisper, he told her to move over or I'll kill you, as he pressed the blade of his knife against her neck. He asked her what her name was, to which she replied Susan. When she asked the same question, Franz had told her that his name was Clinton. He told Allison that he was looking for someone that owed him money and stole his TV. When she asked him to just let her out and take the car, his reply was, "No, I want company." Franz takes her to another part of the city to find his friend that he claims stole his TV and owes him money. Lies. After driving around for a bit, he spots Thenis Kruger amid the crowd of people standing outside of the area called Club Tonight. Dressed in all black, Kruger walks up to the car and gets in the back seat. Allison says in her book, I Have Life, that she wanted to believe so badly that they would just take care of their business and dump her somewhere. There were moments she thought about getting the attention of strangers, but knew there wouldn't be enough time for her to react without them grabbing her, and this would just make them angry. After driving around past a Holiday Inn, Pine Lodge, and Holiday Resort, the University of Port Elizabeth, and Technicon, Franz, or Clinton as he claims, parks the car 90 meters or 295 feet from the road with no one in sight and hidden from all vehicles. After they park, Kruger gets out of the car to smoke a cigarette and survey the area. Left alone in the car with Franz, Allison turns to him and asks, "Now what?" To which he responds, "But I thought you would realize we want sex." "Are you going to fight?" he asks. Realizing she was outnumbered and that there was still a large knife sitting across his lap, she simply replies, "No," hoping that they would just rape her but not harm her. Franz orders her to take off her clothes. Still in her bikini shorts, white vest, denim shirt, and brown leather sandals from the day before, she begins to remove all of her clothing. Everything. Clinton pulled down his track pants and pushed her head towards his crotch. Suck my cock. He told her as he held the knife next to her head, "And if you bite me, I'll kill you." Yanking her head up by her hair, next thing Allison knew, he was between her legs, asking her, "Does your boyfriend do this to you? Do you like it?" Then traveling up to her breast and smiling at her as he left a purple mark on it. He then kissed her and whispered, "You have the nicest tasting fanny." As if that was not enough, he then proceeded to rape her. After he was done, he called Kruger over and asked, "Do you want to have sex with this lovely lady?" Kruger replies, "No. I want to fuck this fucking bitch." This is just disgusting. This is just awful. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He attempted to rape her, but then abruptly got her and said, "No, I can't do this." Not because he had a conscience, more likely because the ejaculation from Clinton was still very present. After the rape was over, Allison dresses. Franz asks Kruger, "You think we should leave her here with no clothes on? What do you think old Nick would want us to do?" Old Nick was another name for Satan. "I think he wants us to kill her," Kruger replies with a laugh, Franz orders her to take her clothes off again. Convinced because they were making her undress again that this meant they would let her go. Unfortunately, this was not the case, because the next thing Allison knew, Franz was straddling the seat and choking her. Pleading with him not to kill her, all he could say was, "Sorry." As he lunged forward and squeezed her neck, Allison says in her book that she felt her bowels move, and the last thing she remembers is feeling embarrassment before everything went black. When she finally came to, she realized that she was lying on the sand amongst broken bottles and beer cans. She says that one of the men knelt over her and she could hear the flesh of her neck split. Back and forth she counted 8 blows. Hearing a grumbling sound and realizing she had no control over her breathing, Allison moved her hand up to cover her neck. Her whole hand disappeared into her neck, but it seemed to work for the moment, knowing she had to play dead. Hearing bits of conversation, the men said, "Do you think she's dead?" And no one could survive that. She heard fumbling through the car, felt her shirt land on her back, and then her car drove off. With some life still left in her, Allison realized she needed to do something. She wrote "Teens" for Athena's, Franz, and wrote "I love Mom" before managing to square it off with a border. Realizing if she didn't try to get help, she would die, Allison pushes herself up on her hands and knees when she suddenly feels something wet and slimy at her abdomen and realizes when she looked down that it was her intestines. She recounts how horrifying it was to see so much of her on the outside. She tried to scoop it up with her hand, but everything just slithered away. She just tried her best to cradle handfuls of her own warm, moist intestines. Still not realizing how badly her neck was slit, she felt around and found her denim shirt, bundled her intestines inside it, and pressed it against her stomach. Her head was still in a normal position, although it felt sort of loose and unsteady. She began to crawl so painstakingly slow, and even though she was making progress, it just didn't feel like it. Realizing she didn't want to die, she loved her life, she wanted to answer these questions, and most importantly, she thought about her mom. With everything she had left in her, she hoisted herself up on her feet, and then everything went black. That was when she realized her head had flopped backwards and almost rested between her shoulder blades. With one hand clutching her shirt, she used the other to push her head forward. Going in and out of consciousness and losing and regaining her eyesight, she moved closer and closer to the road. Finally making it to the road, she laid there praying for help, and although a Volkswagen Beetle had seen her but decided to keep going, her help finally came. People were standing around her screaming hysterically, but then a man knelt down by her, grabbed her hand, and in a soft voice told her to relax. Allison recounts in her book that's when she knew she was in good hands. Tion was his name, her roadside angel. He recently completed a year of veterinary technology. He took her pulse. It was very faint. He asked her to stick out her tongue. It was very pale. This was a sign she had lost a lot of blood. There was a pool of thick, congealed blood around her head and neck. He spotted the huge gash in her neck, lit from ear to ear. He could see everything inside it, the veins, the muscles, and the severed windpipe. He held a cigarette lighter near her neck and saw something hanging out of the wound. Unsure if it was her trachea or thyroid, he decided to tuck it back into the wound to keep it moist and give her his shirt to apply pressure to the wound. He kept talking to her, just doing everything to keep her awake. He realized she was trying to tell him something. He looked down and he was shocked to see her intestines covered in twigs and leaves piled up on top of her stomach. He called a friend and asked him to bring a blanket because, remember, this whole time she was still naked. He just kept asking her questions, trying to keep her awake. Squeezed my hand once for yes and twice for no. He told her that she had the most beautiful green eyes and that he was not going to leave her, even riding with her to the hospital, holding her hand the whole time. Once they finally arrived at the hospital, Tion whispered in her ear that he would be here when she woke up and watched her get wheeled away. While in the hospital, she was able to sign a consent form, write down her name and her mother's phone number. Her blood pressure was extremely low at 90/50, and her pulse was extremely high at 125, an indicator of shock. According to Dr. Angelou, shock occurs when a patient has lost a large quantity of blood, and the blood compensates by constricting the vessels in the veins and arteries. The heart races to enable the remaining blood to be pumped through the body. Dr. Angelou says in Allison's book that in his 16 years as a doctor, he's never seen a patient like this. Her entire body was covered in a fine layer of black sand. Her eyes had hemorrhaged and were blood red. Her hair was matted with sand, twigs, leaves, and dried blood. Her knees were cut and scraped. Her feet were lacerated. Her fingernails were black. She was deathly pale, cold to the touch, and lost a huge amount of blood and couldn't talk, but was completely conscious. Thyroid, usually situated at the front of the neck, had been sliced in two and tucked inside the wound. Dr. Angelo reasoned someone had thought quickly and placed it inside that wound to keep it moist. She should have died from that wound alone. A prick on the neck to the thyroid during surgery can lead to substantial blood loss and even death. It was time for Dr. Angelo to get to work. He retrieved the anterior muscle that had completely retracted into her skull, just behind her ear, and reconnected it to the severed part near her collarbone. The countless lacerations to her abdomen had caused the muscle to completely collapse and the skin to totally disintegrate. He had to physically wash Allison's intestines twice in a saline solution to get rid of the debris. Parts of the lower bowel had been ruptured during the attack, but thankfully her uterus had only been nicked by the knife. Every inch of her intestine had to be examined for any cuts or ruptures. After having to stitch many up, her intestines were finally returned to her abdomen cavity. At 8:35 a.m., after 3 hours of surgery, Allison was wheeled out and monitored by nurses around the clock. Allison still stood the chance of getting sepsis, a life-threatening complication of an infection that occurs when chemicals released into the bloodstream to fight an infection trigger inflammation throughout the body that can cause multiple organs to fail. The outcome for the throat injury was equally poor. There was a strong possibility that the wound would thicken and constrict the trachea. If this happened, she could choke, but by the grace of God, she had overcome everything and beat the odds and survived. But this was not even close to the end of this journey. Allison talks in her book about waking up and seeing her mom, and then Tion, her roadside angel, came to visit her. He was there to see her when she woke up, just like he promised. It was finally time for her to identify her attackers. 2 police officers came into her room with a huge book of photos. Finally, she spots Franz and says, "That's him." And the officer replies, "I knew it." This threw me for a loop at first, and the reasons for the officer's hunch are disgusting. Franz and Kruger were out on bail for 2 previous rape charges. The first charge was just Franz, who abducted, raped, and sexually assaulted a 20-year-old girl at gunpoint. The second charge involved both Franz and Kruger, who raped and sexually assaulted a 21-year-old pregnant woman. After Allison's ID, the men were arrested without incident. At this point, they had no idea that Allison was alive. They were told they were being arrested for rape. The officer handling the case decided to take Kruger in first. Kruger was only 19 at the time. Kruger sat down as Nadia told him that she was investigating 2 charges against him, rape and attempted murder, to which Kruger replies, "Attempted murder? Why attempted murder, asshole?" Officers tell him, "I have news for you. Your last victim, Allison, the lady you left for dead at Nordhook, survived. She's talking and she remembers everything." To which Kruger replies, "Oh fuck, then it won't even help if I lie." He took some rings off his finger and flung them on the table and said, "There, here are her rings." There was still blood on the rings, which was later determined to be Allison's blood. He begins to tell officers the whole story. He and Franz had been drinking and barbecuing that afternoon when they decided to go out and look for a beautiful girl with a nice car to rape and kill. Kruger told Franz that he was going to the club and to come back and look for him if he finds someone. He spoke about how Franz arrived later with a woman in a Renault and some bullshit story about a TV. He goes on to tell officers how Franz raped and sexually assaulted her before he did the same thing. He said that Franz strangled her and he helped him drag her out of the car. After they dragged her from the car, Kruger asked Franz if he thought she was dead, to which Franz replied, "Let's see," and started stabbing Allison in her abdomen and private part. He said he heard a rasping sound coming from her, and he took his knife and slashed her throat. Franz then shoved him aside after he made the first cut and started slashing her throat with a smaller knife. After that, he says they ransacked the car, tossed out the things that were of no value, and drove home. Once there, they had a couple of beers before going to bed. During the confession, he admitted to the other rape on December 4th. After agreeing to go to the site of Allison's attack with another officer, he came back and handed Nadia the knife he used to attack Allison, telling her, "Here's the knife I used to cut her throat." It was a huge knife with a 20-centimeter blade and the name Frick engraved on it. Franz gets taken in for questioning next, and when he is told that one of his charges is for attempted murder, his response to the officer is, "That's impossible. She couldn't have survived." "Well then, I guess I have to tell you the whole truth." He began telling officers the exact same story, and it seemed to Nadia that he actually enjoyed reliving it all. Allison left the hospital on New Year's Eve, never wanted to go back to the apartment on Deer Street. She went back home to live with her mom. The first evening, Allison was able to take a bath. She squatted in the tub and then took a look at her new body. The scars on her stomach were red and raw. She began to sob and called her mom to ask her, "Who will ever love me like this?" To which her mom replied, "One day you will find someone who will. Someone who will be capable of seeing beyond the scars to the beautiful person you are." At the end of that first month, The Evening Post ran an article revealing that Kruger had told a Port Elizabeth district surgeon that he was a Satanist and had claimed that he believed in the devil. He also told the doctor that he had no feeling for his victim or any other person, and that he had no feeling for his mother because she had never given him any material things. Allison was told that they might use Satanism as a defense. Allison says in her book, "But could someone really use Satanism as an excuse? A murder is a murder, whether it's committed by someone who claims to be a Christian or someone who says he's a Satanist." Allison saw the Satanism defense as a ploy, an attempt to lessen the severity and the calculated manner in which they deliberately hunted her down that night. Allison goes on to say that she feared Kruger more than Franz that night. He was disturbingly quiet. In another article, it was Franz who admitted to an evil side with a desire to kill during sex. Oh, so gross. In their statement, they admit to kidnapping and raping their first victim at gunpoint on December 4th and to Allison's kidnapping, rape, and attack 14 days later. They reveal that the first woman was pregnant at the time and pleaded with them not to do it. They admitted to threatening to kill her and leave her naked, but Franz says the urge passed after he raped her. Kruger was quoted saying, "We wanted a nice car and a nice woman. Our goal was to find the woman, take her car, kidnap her, rape her, and then kill her." This means that Franz knew from the start that he wanted to kill Allison that evening. Kruger then apparently became bored while they hunted their prey that night, so Franz told him to go on and that he would find a woman within 5 minutes and follow him. The following morning, there was another article in the Herald this time. In this story, which was more extensive than the one on the previous evening, it was reported that Franz and Kruger told the magistrate that they had gone home to drink after leaving Allison for dead. They go on to say that they planned again the same morning to take another victim, to kill her, and then flee. "We were, however, arrested at a later stage the same day," Kruger had told the court. This means that they had obviously tasted blood after they tried to kill Allison and were clearly planning to embark on a killing spree that would have taken more innocent lives. Kruger also made a public apology and in his statement says, "I'm sorry for what I did. As I stand here, I have great remorse for my deeds. I apologize for what I did to her. Furthermore, I just asked for mercy," he said, which in my opinion means, yeah, I'm sorry for what I did, but please have mercy on me. Shortly after, another story reports that Franz and Kruger posed calmly for pictures, this one, immediately after the plea that they had walked away smiling and laughing. They clearly had no shame and took everyone for fools. The story went on to say, "I know I have a problem. When the bad side comes into me, my wife and child, however, only know my good properties. Then it is as if supernatural power takes over my body." June 12, 1995, Allison's trial began in the Supreme Court of Port Elizabeth. Day one of the trial was focused on the testimony of the first woman Franz raped in February. The victim gave details of her horrific event, telling the court that she was working that night, doing a survey on a particular pizza parlor after a rival company employed her to spy on them. She was sitting in her car when Franz came up to her, shoved a gun to her head, and told her to move over. He drove her to Norhook, where he sexually assaulted and raped. After the rape was over, Franz drove her to a roadhouse to buy her a sandwich and a rose. That's just sick. He then proceeded to rape her again. After it was over, he dropped her off and told her that she was an amazing person and hoped he could make it up to her sometime. June 13th, day two, it was Allison's turn. The second victim, the pregnant woman, testified in the morning and Allison's turn began that afternoon. Allison took the stand and recounted all the details of that horrific night, never once looking over at them to give them any sort of acknowledgement or eye contact. When it came time for the defense to question her, Franz's lawyer went first. The courtroom can see that he was grasping at straws to defend him. Kruger's lawyer went next and also had a difficult time defending him. He badgered Allison repeatedly and even attempted to suggest that if Kruger had been in the car while Franz was strangling her, that he might have been able to stop it. Tion took the stand on Allison's behalf. He spoke of Allison's injury and the fact that it had taken more than 90 minutes for an ambulance to arrive. Dr. Angelo took the stand to provide his medical expert testimony, ending his time on the stand saying that he could not medically explain why Allison survived other than it was simply a miracle. After closing arguments, the verdict came in. Guilty. Judge Jansen spoke quickly and deliberately, convicting Franz on 2 counts of rape, 2 counts of indecent assault, 2 counts of abduction, attempted murder, and theft. Kruger was convicted of the same charges as well. When sentencing day came, Judge Jansen said that he didn't accept Franz's defense that the devil made him do this. Franz voluntarily and deliberately dabbled in Satanism. Franz made the choices that he did, and it would be a sad day if belief in Satanism was regarded as a mitigating factor. Kruger may have been influenced by Franz, but he was no victim. After all, Kruger was the one that made the first cut, and when he was caught, he showed zero remorse for his actions. He was proud of what he had done and even used the bloody knife to prepare food. Sick. It was crystal clear to the court that both men had carefully planned and executed the savage events of that evening. Judge Jansen goes on to say that he had come to the conclusion that Franz and Kruger wanted to kill Allison that night, simply because they felt like it. Their lack of consciousness and the cold-blooded manner in which they tortured Allison and the other two victims was nothing short of inherent evilness. Franz and Kruger are a danger to society, and Judge Jansen said, quote, "I would be shrinking my duties if I did not remove them from society forever." He told Franz and Kruger that he watched them carefully during the trial, going on to say that Franz gave his testimony in a challenging manner. He told Franz that he watched him while several witnesses testified and broke down in tears recounting that evening, and there wasn't even a vague sign of emotion from him. In regards to Kruger, Judge Jansen said that he seemed amused while witnesses were testifying. After a short pause, Judge Jansen looked directly at Franz as he spoke. He let him know that in regards to the first rape in February, he was lumping all his charges together and sentencing him to life in prison. He went on to say that he was lumping the 8 charges against Franz and the 4 charges against Kruger together. Accused number 1. Franz, I sentence you to life imprisonment on charges 1, 2, and 3, the pregnant woman. Accused number 2, Kruger, on charges 1, 2, and 3, I sentence you to 25 years. Accused number 1, Franz, on charges 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, Allison's case, I sentence you to life in prison. Accused number 2, Kruger, on charges 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, Allison's case again, I sentence you to life in prison. After Judge Jansen handed down his sentencing, he made the following order, an order he has never done before or after Allison's case. He insisted that his judgment be typed and 2 copies sent to the relevant authorities to be placed in the files of Franz and Kruger. He ordered that if at any time either of the two should be considered for parole, it was in the judge's intention that Franz and Kruger remain behind bars for the rest of their natural lives. Cheers rang out in the courtroom as Judge Jansen packed up his papers and walked out.